What are we discussing on today's Locked On Diamondbacks podcast? Looking at the good and the bad from the latest ZIP projections for the 2024 Arizona Diamondbacks.
You are Locked On Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas. I'm a multimedia journalist and a graphic designer, so please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. And thank you for making Locked On Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free and available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. And on today's podcast, we'll be taking a look at the latest ZIP projections and breaking down the good and the bad when it comes to the lineup, the rotation, and so much more. And if you like the show, please hit subscribe to Locked On Diamondbacks on YouTube. But now let's jump right into the pod and look at those projections, because entering last season, when ZIPS dropped their projections on Fangraphs, whoever wrote those articles, I have the writer's name here. It's like the only reason I don't credit him because I don't know how to pronounce his last name. It's like Dan Zimborski. I know I butchered that last name. I apologize. But Mr. Dan here, he writes the articles every year based off the ZIP projections. ZIP projections, all computer-based formulas. They spit out numbers and they tell you how they think the player and the team will perform entering the season. And the ZIP projections last year, Dan had to double check, triple check the computer's formulas, because last year he felt like the numbers that generated for the D-backs was way too optimistic, way too generous. And in the first half of the season, the computer looked very on par with how the D-backs played in the first half. The computer still ended up being right because they thought the D-backs were going to be slightly above 500, and that's what they were by the end of the season. And then I think you could even say the projections were even more accurate with how optimistic they were on this D-backs team last year, considering they made it all the way to the World Series. So entering last year, most people who don't run the computer formulas would have just told you, yeah, D-backs are probably a team that's going to be between 78 and 82 wins and should be feisty, but not a real playoff contender. But the ZIP projections kind of thought of the D-backs as a potential playoff team last year, and people thought maybe the ZIP projections were kind of crazy, but by the end of the year, we were like, you know what? The ZIP projections were spot on and even actually ahead of its time, considering the World Series run. And so now you look at the 2024 ZIP projections, and once again, they're looking optimistic for the D-backs. Maybe not as optimistic as last year, but that's because people actually have expectations for the D-backs now. We know what this talent can do when they hit their ceiling. So it makes sense why the projections are optimistic, but maybe not, out of this world optimistic like they were last year. So let's start off segment number one by talking about some of those positive projections that we see for the D-backs entering next season. Because the first one that I want to discuss is a little bit of both good and bad, because Eugenio Suarez, when you look at the ZIP projections, when you read the article, it feels like the projections are down on Suarez because they think his defense is going to decline some next year, and maybe his defense is going to decline more than his bat is going to bounce back next season. But even with that being said, Suarez is still projected to give the D-backs way more than what they got from third base last season. And I think that's really the most important thing. Maybe overall, Suarez is more of a negative defender next season. Maybe he's not the guy that we saw, 2019 with the Reds or those, first couple years in Seattle. Maybe Suarez is not that guy anymore, but he's still projected to be way better than whatever the D-backs got from third base last year. And I'm okay if his defense slips a little bit, if what we get projected according to ZIPS comes into fruition in 2024, because Suarez is projected entering next season to actually have some pop for the D-backs at third base, something that they did not have last year. Suarez projected 22 home runs for the D-backs next season with 75 RBIs. If they can get that, I think that would be a really strong season from Suarez. Now he's also projected 182 strikeouts to just 65 walks. So there's definitely some give and take when it comes to Suarez. His projected slash line is 227, 319, 403. So not exactly inspiring when you look at that average or OPS. But if you tell me Suarez is going to hit over 20 bombs and drive in nearly 80 RBIs, like I think that's exactly what the D-backs want from their third base. If he can just maintain the defensive level that he had last season, I think you're okay with the strikeouts. I think you're okay with the low slash line. You do want to add a little bit more variance in your lineup in terms of that power department. The power is something that the D-backs did not have last year. So if you're just running back last year's team and now you add in at least the variance of a home run with a Suarez, if he's able to get 20 to 25 home runs, maybe even 30 home runs, if at least the power can come back for Suarez, I think that would be exactly what the D-backs need from him for next year. So I'm actually not mad at the ZIP projections for saying the glove might fall off a little bit and the bat might not bounce back as much. If he can at least hit those traditional, counting numbers of the home runs and the RBIs, I think D-backs fans would at least be happy with that. Now, to get D-backs fans really excited, one guy that ZIP projections really like entering next season, if he's able to get a decent workload. This is with a projected 474 at bats, but Jordan Lawler is someone that the ZIP projections really like entering next season if he is able to get around 500 at bats like they project. They think if he hits 474 at bats, they think he could have 11 home runs, 22 stolen bases, and they actually think in terms of WAR, he would be fifth on the D-backs team with 2.4 WAR entering next season. A slash line of 247, 322, 380 is not the prettiest, but if it's his first full season in the big leagues and he's a 2.5 win player, I think we would take that as D-backs fans. It would mostly be on the heels of his defense and his speed, but that's okay because that's basically what Alek Thomas is, right, in center field. So if you just basically get Alek Thomas at shortstop with a little bit more consistency from a hitting perspective, I think we would all take that as D-backs fans. And listen, we all love Geraldo Perdomo. We love what he did last season, but it's not like what Perdomo did last year is not replicable. Like you look at his stat line, you even look at the traditional counting numbers. It's not like Perdomo lit it up last year. Where Perdomo really prospered was he played good defense, he stole bases, and he came through in the clutch. If Jordan Lawler can do that, I think he's probably a better defensive player than Geraldo Perdomo. I think he's faster than Geraldo Perdomo. Can he clutch it up with runners in scoring position? I don't know. That's one of those stats that's more volatile. That's not as replicable year to year. So Perdomo probably won't even be as good with runners in scoring position as he was this past year. So if Lawler can be 280 average with runners in scoring position and then provide more speed and defense than Domo did last year, I like Lawler a lot to hit these projections entering next season if he's able to do those three things. And then the final thing from the ZIP projections that I do like entering next season is that it basically thinks Lourdes Gurriel and Ketel Marte are going to replicate their seasons from this past year. And Marte had himself a really good bounce back season after struggling mightily in 2022. They think Marte is going to keep it up with nearly the same slash line. They think the power might come down a little bit. But you also have to remember when you look at these projections, they're always more conservative than not. So for the most part, they think Ketel Marte is going to be the same player entering next season. Same with the Lourdes Gurriel. And both of those players are so important for the D-backs, obviously. I mean, Ketel Marte, pre-Corbin Carroll doing what he did last year, you would have said Marte, best hitter in the lineup despite the down 2022 season. That's why we really needed him to bounce back in 2023, and he did. And so if we get 2023 Marte again in 2024, that's a top 5 second baseman in the sport. And then Lourdes Gurriel, very good contributor last year. I think he's going to be an above average contributor again for the D-backs, provide a little power, provide some defense as well, and just stability in the middle of the lineup. I mean, Lourdes Gurriel might be, by the time the offseason wraps, if the D-backs get like JD Martinez or something, like there's a world where Gurriel is like the 6 or 7 hitter for the D-backs next year. Like that's a real possibility depending on where Torey Lovullo wants to hit like Eugenio Suarez and Gabriel Moreno. Like there is a real possibility that Gurriel's like your 6 or 7 hitter next season, which is just absolutely nuts if that's true. I'm not sure if that's actually how the lineup is going to, shake out, but there is a world where he could be batting that low just because of the amount of talent and depth that the D-backs could have in their lineup. So when looking at ZIP projections for 2024, I like the fact that Suarez is just going to be way more productive than any third baseman from last year. Like the fact that they think Jordan Lawler could have a breakout season next year. And I do like the fact that they think Lourdes Gurriel and Ketel Marte will have repeat seasons in 2024. Now we'll talk about some projections that I don't think are that favorable for the D-backs entering next season. Some projections that I just don't agree with. But if you need to buy some tickets for a 2024 Arizona Diamondbacks game, maybe the home opener, then you need to go to Game Time, because Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you the complete peace of mind with your purchase. See the view from your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. All-in prices show your total upfront, so you know you're getting a great deal before you check out. Buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. It's the best place to find last-minute seats. With zone deals, you pick the section and Game Time picks the seats for big-time savings. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right. Let's get back into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Let's look at some projections that we don't like for the 2024 D-backs. And the first thing that I want to talk about is they think Corbin Carroll's numbers are going to go down next season. Now, I do want to say, entering 2023, they thought Corbin Carroll was going to be by far the best rookie. Not by far. They thought it was actually a slight edge over Gunnar Henderson of who the best rookie was going to be entering last season. And the projected stats for Corbin Carroll, he was projected a 3.9 win player in terms of WAR. They projected 16 home runs, 20 stolen bases, and 509 at bats. So just off the projections last year, they thought Carroll was going to be a 4 WAR player, and he just murdered the projections last year. I mean, he ended up being a 6 WAR player. He had almost 30 home runs. He had almost 60 stolen bases. Like, he crushed the projections from last year. He went from the 3.9 WAR player to a 6 WAR player in reality. And so how do the ZIP projections have Corbin Carroll entering 2024? Well, they went from a 3.9 projection to a 4.6 projection, which I just don't feel like is a big enough jump. They think his slash line is going to be 272, 354, 460, which is basically the same, if not slightly worse than what he just did this past year. 20 home runs, 39 stolen bases. Like I said, I get it. The computer is always going to be more conservative than not. But I feel like Corbin Carroll could have an MVP season next year. Now, sophomore year is always the biggest, potential breaking point for a player's career. Larger sample size. They're going to pitch to you different. Like, if Corbin Carroll struggles in his career, year 2 next season will probably be, next year is the biggest potential to be the down year in Corbin Carroll's career. But considering what he just did as a rookie, there's also potential for Corbin Carroll, considering last year was just his first time getting his feet wet, There's potential for him to even hit another level next year. Just like what we saw Ronald Acuna do back in the day when it was like, can Acuna hit another level? Like Acuna was already putting up some monster numbers back in the day. Like Acuna won Rookie of the Year, don't forget, and finished 12th in MVP voting his very first season. In his second season, he went up to 37 stolen bases, 41 home runs, a near 40-40 player, and finished 5th in MVP voting. So what I'm trying to say here is Acuna, as the Rookie of the Year, got better in year 2. Now, Corbin Carroll's Rookie of the Year, way better than Acuna's Rookie of the Year. So the kind of jump that Corbin Carroll can make won't be as pronounced as the jump that Acuna made in year 2. But maybe Carroll from his rookie season can put up the year 2 numbers that Acuna just put up this past season. Maybe year 2 Corbin Carroll is what Acuna just did in year 7, which was 41 home runs, 73 stolen bases, 1,000 OPS, a 337 average, and an MVP. Maybe year 2 Corbin Carroll is just where Ronald Acuna is right now. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I definitely think it's in the realm of possibilities that maybe Corbin Carroll, maybe his numbers just go up next year. Maybe he turns into a 30, 40 home run guy. Like if he hits 35 home runs and steals 65 stolen bases next year, would that surprise anyone? If his OPS goes from like 850 to like 925, would that surprise anyone? Probably not. So the fact that the ZIP projections really didn't improve that much from where they thought he was projected entering 2023 after seeing this historic season from Corbin Carroll, I thought was just a little bit surprising. That's why I was down on the projections for Corbin Carroll according to ZIPS entering 2024. The second thing that I don't like to see on here is the fact that they think Geraldo Perdomo is going to come back to earth next season. Now, I don't think that's entirely too surprising because I do think Perdomo is probably the most likely regression candidate on the D-backs, but they're projecting him basically to be a one less win player entering next season, according to WAR. And that's probably going to be accurate. And it's also probably going to determine on how much Jordan Lawler plays. Like, if Lawler is a big part of the D-backs plans, I think to start the season, it will be all Geraldo Perdomo. But if Domo comes out the gates super slow next season, and maybe the D-backs as a team come out a little bit slow, Domo also not hitting at the plate, I could see the D-backs, week 3, week 4, be like, you know what? Let's give Jordan Lawler a little bit more run. Let's see if he could spark this offense a little bit. I could see that happening and maybe Jordan Lawler running away with the job, but Domo still impressive defensively, still has some decent speed, and I think his base running has improved a lot. Now, the clutchness, that's the part where it's like, okay, if he can't repeat that, you can see why his numbers are going to be down next year. But in terms of the batter's eye, I think he's so smart at the plate. I think Domo is a high IQ guy. And I actually think maybe his ceiling isn't high, but I do like the floor of Geraldo Perdomo. So I'm not entirely too upset that ZIPS thinks that Perdomo will regress next season. That probably will be the case. I just think Domo has a higher floor than what a lot of people realize. Maybe the ceiling isn't there for Domo, but I don't think Domo is going to be a bad player for the D-backs next season. I think he will be very serviceable and a perfect bridge player until Jordan Lawler matures into the player that we all think he can be. Then the final thing that really irks me from the ZIP projections, when looking at the pitching, they think Merrill Kelly and Brandon Pfaadt are going to put up the same numbers next season. They think Brandon Pfaadt and Merrill Kelly are going to be the same guy next year. And it's not like they think Merrill Kelly and Pfaadt are going to be elite. They think they're going to be like fine pitchers. They both are projected with a 3.97 ERA. I think Merrill Kelly is going to have almost a 4 ERA. Now, if Brandon Pfaadt does have a 3.97 ERA, I would actually be very, very happy with that. But according to the projections, they think Merrill Kelly is going to pitch 154 innings to Pfaadt's 147. First of all, if Kelly's healthy, he's going to pitch like 190 innings because he's a workhorse. They think Merrill Kelly's going to give up 21 home runs to Pfaadt's 19. Like, Kelly does give up some home runs, but Will he give up more than Brandon Pfaadt next season? I don't think that's going to be the case. Their numbers are basically identical when looking at the ZIP projections. I think that's insane. Merrill Kelly, the last few years, has been one of the better pitchers in Major League Baseball. When you look at his 2021 and what he did last year, like Merrill Kelly is a stud. He's a legit number 2 starter in the sport. What he did in the postseason, electric. And the fact that ZIP projections think he's going to be as good as Brandon Pfaadt, I'm not even upset with the numbers that they have projected for Pfaadt. Like I said, I will be happy if whoever they have projected for Pfaadt, if he actually hits those projections. But for Merrill Kelly, this is an all-star level pitcher. This is a Cy Young level pitcher. Maybe not Cy Young winner, but this is a guy that should at least get votes. This is the guy that should at least be a candidate for the All MLB team. We look at the All MLB team from this past year. Merrill Kelly had a case over guys like Nathan Eovaldi, who made the All MLB team. Like, that's how good Merrill Kelly is. The fact that ZiPS thinks he's only going to be as good as a year 2 pitcher who struggled mildly in the regular season this past year. Meanwhile, Merrill Kelly has been an absolute stud 2 of the last 3 seasons. I just think that's a little bit crazy by these ZiPS projections. Now, we'll talk about the good that I see with the projections, pertaining to the pitching staff. But did you know Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube? Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right. Let's get back into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. And don't forget, if you like the show, please follow me on Twitter at CareerThomas24 for my personal account, or look up Locked On Diamondbacks both Twitter and Instagram for the podcast handle. But now let's get back into the podcast and let's discuss some projections that I like for the pitching staff for the D-backs in 2024. And the first thing I want to discuss is the fact that they think Erod will live up to the contract, because according to ZiPS, I don't like the innings pitched. They only have him down for 138 innings pitched. That's probably fair because Erod has dealt with health issues throughout his career. If you do look at his innings pitched throughout his career, Erod, it's not like he has too many 200 inning pitch seasons under his belt. He has one back in 2019. Then outside of that, he doesn't have another season where he's even touched 160 innings pitched. So the odds of him hitting 138 is probably more likely than not. But if you prorate his numbers for his career over 33 starts, this is someone that would hit 188 innings pitched per season. So if we get a fully healthy Erod, he probably will be a workhorse. And if he hits these projections, I think we'll all be very happy with that, because in 138 innings pitch, they haven't projected 135 strikeouts. That would be a very good number to go along with a 3.65 ERA. If Erod can stay fully healthy and pitch to a 3.65 ERA as the number 3 starter for the D-backs, I still think Gallen's going to put up Cy Young numbers. I still think Merrill Kelly will put up all-star numbers. So if Erod is doing that as your number 3 starter, the D-backs will have one of the most formidable 1, 2, 3 rotations in all of Major League Baseball. And if you sprinkle in the fact, if Pfaadt hits his projections as well, the D-backs quite literally would have one of the best 1 through 4s in the sport. So I love this Erod projection. The D-backs in the postseason, that number 3 starter, it wasn't just the fact that they didn't have a number 3 starter because Pfaadt stepped up to be the number 3 starter. It was the fact that they only had 3 reliable starters, because that 4th day, you had to go to the bullpen day. And I didn't even hate it in the moment, because how the D-backs were constructed, I thought the bullpen day was probably their best option. And it worked at times, like in the Philadelphia series, but in the World Series, it did not work at all. Or did it work in the Dodgers series? I don't remember. The bullpen day definitely worked one day. Maybe it was the Phillies series, but it did not work in the World Series. And that's okay because the D-backs addressed that concern with Erod. And if Erod can step up to the plate in the postseason, that's where his money is going to be earned. Because if you can get Erod to look good in the playoffs, and then let's say the D-backs are in a playoff series where they get to game 4, and then Brandon Pfaadt is starting and looking like 2023 Brandon Pfaadt, the D-backs have a chance to go to another World Series at that point. So Erod, if he hits these projections, that contract will end up being a bargain, especially when you see some of these deals that other pitchers have gone, like Frankie Montez and some of these other guys are getting, like Chris Sale extension. Like, I'm so glad that the D-backs got to Erod early because now a guy like Jordan Montgomery, all MLB team Jordan Montgomery, he might be worth like 25 a year now. So glad to see the D-backs lock up Erod early. Another thing that I like from the projections, they think Ginkel and Seawald are going to be nails, and they think the rest of the bullpen will at least be serviceable. They think the D-backs bullpen entering next season will be a lot like it was this past year. Middle of the pack, which is all we need. They think Ginkel and Seawald will do their jobs in the back end of the bullpen. Then the rest of the pieces will be just fine enough. They do like that the D-backs have depth in the bullpen, but I don't think anyone is really that standout outside of Ginkel and Seawald. That's fine. That's probably accurate. Ryan Thompson was a revelation at the end of last season. Can he do it again? So was Sal Frank. Can Mantiply get back to the guy he was a couple years ago? We'll see. So I understand why the projections on the rest of the guys in the bullpen outside of Seawald and Ginkel might not be that high, but all we need is those guys to just be serviceable. Give us a couple dudes with a 3.8 ERA, maybe another guy with like a 2.9 ERA, a couple dudes with like a 4.3 ERA. Like, I think the D-backs bullpen can be fine next season. Mantiply is projected like a 3.91 ERA. Miguel Castro, he's projected 3.97. I actually think that would be fantastic if Castro could pitch to a 3.97. We'll see about that. But if you could get good Mantiply, if you could get good Thompson, solid Sal Frank, maybe a Kyle Nelson can come back around. Luis Frias is one of those guys I'm keeping my eye on. Like, I do think outside of Ginkel and Seawald, there could be potentially two, maybe 3, 4 other relievers that I think could be kind of interesting and actually help out the D-backs in the bullpen. So I don't mind the projections for the D-backs bullpen 2024, and I would actually welcome the D-backs projections for the bullpen next season. And then to wrap up the podcast, let's actually talk about how ZIPS has the D-backs projected next season, because ZIPS thinks the D-backs are going to finish between 84 and 88 wins. And guys, that would be just fine, because if you hit, now listen, 84, 85 is not good enough, but 86 to 88 might be good enough for a wild card, and that's all the D-backs need. You just need a wild card berth, because like the Philadelphia Phillies have showed you, 2 years ago, the Phillies were a wild card team. Then they got to the World Series. And so the next season, you would have been like, oh, if the Phillies don't win 90 games, or if the Phillies don't win 95 plus games with the amount of money they spent and the team that they have. I mean, they added Trey Turner. They just came off the World Series appearance. They have an elite rotation. Like, if that team doesn't win 95 to 100 games, it's a disappointment. And guess what? The Phillies last season barely got to 90 wins. They did end up finishing with 90 wins, but again, they were just a wild card team. But what did they do in the postseason? They woke up. Those bats woke up. Did they lose to the D-backs? Yes, but the Phillies look like an elite World Series contender once they got to the postseason, and that's all the D-backs need to do. Get 86 to 88 wins, get the wild card berth, and then wake up in the postseason, because I think this D-backs team will be built for the postseason. They will have the speed, the chaos, the havoc. Then they might actually have some power too. Go get us JD Martinez. Then you actually have real rotation depth. I think the D-backs might only win 86 to 88 games next season, but if that's enough for a wild card, if the D-backs make it to the postseason with a wild card berth, then watch out for this D-backs team, because I think they're built for the playoffs. I think they could take down anybody in a playoff series. Braves, Dodgers, I don't care. D-backs built for the postseason, and I would welcome any opponent. Now, that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back next week for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. We'll definitely be talking with Lindsey Crosby of Locked On MLB Prospects for at least one podcast crossover next week to preview D-backs prospects heading into 2024 and who can help out the roster next season. So be on the lookout for that. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Doses.